Olá, pessoal. Então, bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, a depender de qual parte do mundo você está e a depender de qual momento você vai estar vendo essa sessão. Acredito que muitos aqui, por enquanto, boa noite. Hoje a gente recebe a Elina para falar de um tema super interessante, super quente dentro da comunidade das ciências comportamentais, que é a intersecção do campo das ciências comportamentais com a inteligência artificial. Acredito que muitos aqui já estão usando alguma ferramenta de inteligência artificial com ou sem relação com projetos de ciências comportamentais aplicadas. Sinta-se à vontade, fazer perguntas, comentários, tirar suas dúvidas, dar ideias. E antes de mais nada, eu queria passar ao Guilherme, que vai fazer uma pequena introdução. E a partir disso, eu queria dar todas as boas-vindas também, apresentar toda a equipe, eu, Henry, Guilherme, Flávia, Juliana, e dar as boas-vindas a todos vocês. Vai lá, Guilherme.
Bom, boa noite, gente. Obrigado por terem vindo. Obrigado, thank you, Elina, por estar aqui. Na verdade, agora são 11 da noite em Amsterdã, de onde a Elina fala. A Elina, que como eu falei para ela aqui nos bastidores, antes de a gente começar, é corresponsável pela, ah, pelo C3, na medida que ela foi uma das organizadoras originais da London Behavioral Economics Network, na época que ela morava lá, que foi onde, em algum momento nos idos de 2016 ou 7, estando numa segunda-feira em Londres, eu fui e aí fiquei com a ideia de um dia fazer isso no Brasil, e aí fizemos. Lá era em pubs, mas enfim, a pandemia mudou tudo e agora estamos aqui online, mas vamos aproveitar o melhor que a gente pode dos nossos meios. Ah, Sem mais, vamos apresentar a nossa convidada de hoje. A Elina Halonen, ela é estrategista em insights comportamentais, ela tem mais de 15 anos de experiência como consultora especializada em mudança de comportamento, insights de consumo e design comportamental. Ela é cofundadora da Irrational Agency, que foi uma das pioneiras em integrar ciência comportamental e pesquisa de mercado, e ela ainda contribui como consultora independente em projetos estratégicos na área de bens de consumo, varejo, finanças e saúde. Um dos aspectos que ela trabalha e trata, e foi como ela veio aqui na primeira vez que ela visitou o C3, em temas como a abordagem de perspectivas fora do contexto, do famoso contexto weird. Ela também é uma inovadora, e isso acabou a levando e a mantém na linha de frente da aplicação de ciência comportamental e a levou a desenvolver uma série de insights em inteligência artificial para desafios comportamentais. E uma das características dela é ser uma tremenda disseminadora de conteúdo, uma tremenda disseminadora de conhecimento. Então, ela hoje vai trazer para a gente essa combinação dela de rigor analítico, curiosidade e bom humor para fazer esse cruzamento e explicar e debater o cruzamento entre inteligência artificial e ciência comportamental. Hoje a gente vai experimentando com formatos. A palestra vai ser um pouco mais curta, então vai ser uma palestra talvez de uns 20 minutos, e depois a gente já cai direto no bate-papo. Tá ok? Elina, thank you again for being here. The floor is yours, and we are eager to hear and to talk and discuss later.
Great. Thank you, Guillermo. That was a very long introduction, and I could sort of make out some of that. And I think that was my digital twin that wrote at least some of that introduction. That is, it's very, very complimentary about me. I would be more modest, but it writes brilliantly for the times I need it. So I will get my slides, and let's see. Seems to work just fine. There we go. And I wonder, I probably don't see you if I put presentation mode. No, I do see you. Okay, so great. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you. At first I thought, I was like, well, what am I going to talk about? Because actually AI and behavioral science is quite a huge area, and I would hesitate to, call myself an expert, because there are actual machine learning experts and so on who, would probably frown upon that. But when Guillermo and I talked, I figured that I may have some things to share that will be valuable. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this area can feel really confusing. Because actually, when people say behavioral science and AI, it can mean so many different things. And when someone says, you know, behavioral science and AI is an interesting area, your first question should be, well, what do you mean? Do you mean AI, using AI to run experiments? First of all, what kind of AI? Because AI is not all one thing, obviously. But I don't need to necessarily, I probably don't need to explain that here. Is it about how algorithms shape human behavior? Is it about designing better systems? Or is it, it could be something else entirely. And so what I found when I started looking into this area about a year and a half, 2 years ago, is that the definitions tend to be quite narrow. The only book that exists currently, as far as I know, is this book by Stuart Mills that's called AI for Behavioral Science, and it has a framing for the field, but it's mostly about framing this whole area as sort of hyper nudges and behavioral influence tool, like decision architectures, which limits the conversation to those who are working quite closely with, potentially limits the conversation to those who are working with machine learning engineers. So someone who talks about this kind of stuff and actually works in this area is Amy Bucher. She works, but when I've spoken to her, she says, I bring the behavioral science, and then I work with very talented, machine learning experts. I don't actually do that, roughly speaking, is what she said. But if you feel like me, that, well, I don't have a machine learning engineer right here next to me, I'm not doing that, then maybe this isn't for me at all. And it took me a long time to kind of work out where I fit into this, where's my interest, and how can we as a field, as a profession, engage with this, because it must be more than just that. But I couldn't work out what that is, because this is the only book, and it kind of doesn't exist, and it's as I found, it's kind of scattered in a lot of places. And so and I should probably add that the reason I've gotten into this is that a few years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, time blurs now, I went to a market research or consumer insights event here in Amsterdam, and it was anything anyone talked about was AI, this, AI, that. And when I looked around, 90% of the people who were talking about it were men. And no offense to any men in the call, but that doesn't seem very balanced, considering that it's like 50-50 of, roughly. It doesn't feel very representative, that only one group of people, and it's very particular kinds of, like middle class, middle-aged white men from Anglo-Saxon countries that seemed to be the only people who were talking about it. And I just thought, like, no, this cannot be right. I don't know how I'm going to get into this, but if this annoys me, if this bothers me, then you have to be the change you want to see. And I don't know what that means yet, but I'm going to find a way, because I can't just be annoyed about this. I have to do something about it. So that's how I got into this. And I thought there just has to be more representation. And I looked around and thought there aren't many people. So um, I guess I'll find a way, and there's plenty of room for other people. But so anyway, why it feels so confusing, and I realized when we were talking last week, that I've actually kind of mapped out the territory for myself, and what follows is not meant to be a grand theory. It's my mapping process, and if it helps other people to figure out where they could engage with AI, depending on your skills, your experience, your interest, then great. And at least you may have more vocabulary or more concepts to think about what about this interests you. Because if it's everything, if you don't have a way to narrow your curiosity, it feels overwhelming. It felt overwhelming to me, because there's just so much to read. And if you try to understand everything, you'll very easily just disconnect. And it's like, no, I can't do this at all. And that's not good, because this is like all this AI stuff in various shapes and forms. It's coming, whether you want it or not. whether you like it or not, whether you disagree with it, whether it should be or shouldn't be, it doesn't matter. Your feelings about it don't matter at all. The longer you sit around and resist, the further, the further behind you'll start. And that's just the way it is. I'm not an AI enthusiast. I'm not any kind of evangelist, but I'm kind of pragmatist that, I better get on this train because it's kind of, it's gathering steam, and I'd rather be on the train than left on a platform. So this is I've called it very fancily behavioral science AI matrix, but I just gave it a name. So what kind of AI is involved and how you might engage with it. So let's hope this helps you. So the first dimension, it was meant to be a matrix, but then there was a third dimension, so much for that. And I couldn't visualize it, so I thought, whatever. Imagine in your minds. So the first one is purpose. What direction is your use or your inquiry? Are you using AI systems, things, tools, or are you applying behavioral science to understand AI, broadly speaking? So what the first one is what a lot of people think is using AI as a tool for behavioral science. So, advancing behavioral science work, either reviewing literature, analyzing things, running experiments, or designing and delivering interventions. That's what a lot of people think is what it is what AI plus behavioral science is. But that's a very narrow slice, and it's not going to apply to everyone. I never run experiments or simulations. It's not the kind of work I do. For example, so does that mean that it's not for me at all? That was a question that I've kind of thought about. Now, the other way to think about it is to use behavioral science as a lens on AI in like broadest sense of the word. To use what we know from behavioral science, again in a very broad sense, to understand, critique, influence, all that kind of stuff, to examine how these systems function, how they interact with people, how people interact with them, and how they could be designed differently. So that could involve biases and blind spots in different AI systems, human-AI interaction, so decision-making, trust, resistance, all this kind of stuff. So AI adoption as well, or contributing to better design. So there's like two ways to use that. Is it AI coming into behavioral science as a I don't know, like a like a tool that powers it, or is it the other way around? So that's one way to think about it. And these are not mutually exclusive, but it's just meant to be like just pick and mix. And then the other part is, hold on, there we go. So the scale. Is your attention on the individual experience or systemic consequences? There are quite a lot of people who talk about so macro or micro. Actually, I should have put this the other way around, because there'll be a lot of books that talk about the macro stuff. So things like algorithmic governance and societal impact. There's no shortage of books like that. All this kind of stuff about automate scoring systems and all this type of stuff, impact of facial recognition and various things. There is a lot on that, but that's not necessarily something we can do. It's useful to read about it, but at least for me, that's not something I can influence. So again, that's interesting context, but what do I do with that? What do I do? How do I get involved in that conversation? I can't. So then the other side is the micro. What happens to individual behavior, individual cognition, thinking, and feeling when you're interacting with AI? Is it it could be something like, how does personalization shape choice architecture, decision fatigue, and I've written about this idea of generative friction. Like how does our decision making, our work change when producing things is no longer the friction? Because until now, there's been a certain kind of friction of producing text, producing images. Now there isn't. It's just a continuous fire hose of options to choose from. That shifts the decision process in ways that we have no idea what that's going to look like. We don't know. This is so new. There is nothing on it. So this is an opportunity when there isn't anything on it about it yet. That's an opportunity for us as behavioral scientists to come in and go, hey, we actually know about this, and this isn't just about UX and so on. UX is separate. that's the other thing, is that we need to work out where do we bring something unique that isn't something that user experience is already covering. And I think this kind of, for me, this kind of meta level of like what happens to all this other stuff that is not just the interface, but sort of one step removed. So anyway, so that, all this kind of stuff is for me the micro level. And then there's a third level, which is the interaction. So is it what's the dynamic between the human and the AI? Is it that there is the transactional is kind of like, I found it quite hard to sort of define this, but it's almost like top down, that someone decides what the interaction is going to be, or the impact, or whatever that is. So um, the system has certain boundaries, and your interaction with it is sort of predetermined in some ways, like credit scoring tools. There is also AI in that, but that's not something that's, I can rule that out because I'm not going to work in that space. I don't work in that kind of thing. Hyper nudges, that's, she doesn't call them hyper nudges, but Stuart Mills does. So let's say nudges that adapt based on your behavior and so on. That's the kind of thing that Amy Bucher does with Lirio, and I highly recommend following her and looking up talks that she's done. But that would be that kind of thing, is that it is delivered to you. And then there's the relational side, that a system that allows for co-creation or collaboration, and it feels like the interaction or the exchange is shaped by both the human and the system, but more on the, I guess, the human's terms. So straightforward examples like using LLMs or GPT as ChatGPT as a writing partner, where your input steers the direction and it's kind of a collaborator, or anything that is kind of co-pilot type thing. So that could also be a chatbot, or something that is tailored for you to find information and so on. So it could be all sorts of things. But basically, the point is that it's not predetermined how you interact with it. And so also I should add that there's sort of an overlapping dimension in this, is the generative AI versus not generative AI. And I think that for me the difference is that until generative AI, there was no way for me to get into this because I don't come from that background. And so that's the other part, is that there is a whole lot other stuff that is also AI, but is not generative AI. But I think there is a whole lot for us to get involved in now that we can experience it ourselves. So there's another sort of a layer that is interspersed with this, which is this definition, this technical definition, but I left it out because this is more about the sort of the behavioral dynamics, I suppose. Dog wants to talk to me. She thinks that this is no time to be sitting at a computer. She doesn't like that. So where I landed with this, like this, it didn't look like this matrix, but it was sort of implicit, and I just formalized it for today. This kind of process, this has taken very loosely taken over a year. But for me, it clarified what I can ignore, or what I can leave out, and what start to go more in the direction of what I'm interested in. And what does that look like? What does it look like, my interest in AI plus behavioral science? So it is mostly as a lens, so using behavioral science to reflect on, critique, and understand AI systems, our interactions, and so on. Sometimes as a tool, but when I say sometimes, I mean sometimes as a tool in relation to behavioral science. But I do use generative AI tools literally every day, all day long, even in the weekends for personal life, a bunch of stuff. It's part of my workflow now. It's really part of my workflow, and it's for work, it's for personal stuff, it's for fun. Sometimes I've actually laughed more than I've laughed at stand-up comedy on Netflix when ChatGPT is roasting me. So it's all sorts of things. And it's more, my interest is more the micro, so focusing on individual cognition, interaction, and so on. Although obviously context matters, so I keep an eye on that, but it's not where I work at. And yeah, I'm mostly interested in that relational stuff, so human AI teaming and collaboration and co-creation, of which there will be a lot of in the coming years and so on. So that's kind of where I landed and how it helped me. And then that ultimately, I ended up, I was going to write just a little bit on my other Substack, but then it kind of spiraled out of control a little bit. Well, not out of control, but it kind of spiraled a little bit because people were quite interested in it. And so I split out this other Substack, which is more about AI stuff. And because I realized that some people are interested in AI and behavioral science, but not the actual behavioral science stuff, and vice versa. So it just made sense to put them in separate places. And there's basically, when I was thinking about how to frame it, that's also where I was, tried to think about like, what is it? What am I, or who am I professionally when I think about this? And I think that's something useful for not necessarily go as far, but think about what is it that interests you, and find that part, even if it is just for you and not to use that as part of your professional identity. There is no way we can be part of this conversation because it will be everywhere. You can't have an opinion on it properly if you don't engage with it intensively and extensively, because you won't understand how you just don't you won't understand like where I started and where I am now, how I interact with ChatGPT or the other ones is totally different from when I started. And so I just, and a lot of the things that I've become interested in is because I have noticed something about myself, how I'm interacting with it, or how it's interacting with me, and it kind of sparks those ideas. But you won't be able to properly have an opinion on this stuff if you don't use it all the time, not just for a transactional, like one thing here and there. You must understand how you've integrated into your work stream, your workflow, to understand the impact it will have for other people and on the whole. So that's where I landed. And then I said I'd bring a couple of personal use cases. So I've created custom GPTs were launched by ChatGPT about I think September a year ago. So not 2024, but no, seriously, yeah, September 2023. So they've been around for quite a while. I have 60 plus of them. I don't know, I didn't count them, but I basically create them all the time. And so, this is just a small selection. Those are some of my work ones. And what they have is they all have how many people know custom GPTs and use them? I just quite a few, maybe. I can't see all of you, but I'll just pretend. I pretend I can see you. Can't work out how to put all your faces up. But so for those who don't know, the way custom GPTs work is that you can put knowledge files and specific instructions, tell it what kind of tone you want, and so on. What's the purpose of the custom GPT? There's instructions. There's a configurator that you can just talk to it. You don't have to do that. But there's also custom GPTs for literally refining your instructions. And what it does is that you put your own knowledge files there, and you can direct it to answer from those things. So, for example, I have the behavioral insights one has more behavioral economics books. The BC bot has handbooks and stuff in behavior change theories, because if you this is what I mean, that you won't understand how they work, how this stuff works unless you experiment, and experimentation takes a lot of time. If you put very contradictory knowledge files, it delivers a bit of nonsense. So you have to curate the files, curate the knowledge base to be in the same direction or the same kind of stuff. Then it makes sense, and you can trust what it says more. Now I never really ask anything I don't already know, but it saves me time to kind of, if I have an idea for an article or I'm thinking about something, I can just talk to my behavior change wheel bot, and it will basically pick up like a colleague who is very well versed in behavior change wheel or behavior change theories. And because I work mostly by myself, it's very handy to have a little collaborator who is well versed in all these theories. Sometimes they get it wrong, but that's okay because I can pick it up. But it's really helpful because it's much faster to talk than it is to write. And so I can just talk about like, I have this idea, maybe it's like this, or what do you think? And then, bounce it back and forth. Now, I also create some for projects, like the vaccine behavior expert is I uploaded a bunch of articles and other materials curated that was specifically about vaccine behavior. And it's super helpful because then you can also bounce ideas, or, it helps to look up stuff much faster than opening PDFs and so on. I also use it for personal stuff. So I have, I talk about dogs a lot. I have 2 dogs, and I'm really into dog science, canine science, dog science. So I have one that has lots of, dog sciencey stuff, and I also write about that. So, I can just talk about ideas when I'm walking my dogs to canine scientists. And it basically, it's like, yes, I know what you mean. And it just writes an outline, and we bounce ideas back and forth and writes an outline by the time I'm home. So it's not that then I still need to write it. It's never perfect, but it does the work that I would never do because it's not my job, but it does the job of writing the outline based on my thoughts. And that's a huge help to me. I don't know if other people work the same way, but that helps me. And then I just do some fun stuff as well. Like, some people may have tried the Black Mirror interpreter, which is basically put any news from the US, and it will explain how it's dystopian and how it relates to actual stuff that they've already spec'd out in their playbooks. And then, some fun stuff like I learned by accident that ChatGPT also reads dog faces and reads dog facial expressions and emotions, and is actually spookily good at working out what is happening in a situation with zero context. It is I've shared some of those with Guillermo, and he probably thought I'm a crazy dog lady, but they're public. I can share them. It's I discovered that by accident. One evening I was bored, and I was very surprised, and I kept giving it more difficult situations, like, tell me what you think is happening here, and it was surprisingly good. So that's just an example of test ChatGPT or the other ones, test what they can do. Just, even if you don't need it, just for fun. And then you might accidentally discover something that is genuinely useful. Here's another personal use case. So the Elena pot I was talking about, that is my digital twin. These are so many years ago, but I think 10 years ago, there was a startup called Crystal Knows, and basically it scraped the internet, whatever you've written publicly about you, and it created a profile, and you could just get that on anyone who had a LinkedIn profile and Twitter profile, whatnot. So I still had the screenshot of that, and then they're still going amazingly, but now they have, like, you have to do it's still free. You can do that for yourself. You can fill a bunch of answer a bunch of questions, and it gives you a profile. So I've done it a few years ago as well. I looked them up, and I basically worked through with ChatGPT to extract a bunch of stuff from those, like that kind of stuff. That's not written by me, that's ChatGPT. And so, like, I was just curious what would happen. This was actually after there was some sort of panel discussion at LSE about this stuff, and someone mentioned something about like digital twins, and I was like, I wonder, or no, synthetic personas, and I wondered, could I do a synthetic persona of me? And that's how I end up with this. And so, I extracted it, I experimented with it, and then I ended up with I said I'd like to create a custom GPT. I basically just said to ChatGPT, this is what I want to do, how should I do it? And I didn't know how to do that. It just kind of like designed a process, and then we went through it. I say we, but yeah, I went through it with ChatGPT. And so it suggested how to incorporate them, created a custom GPT, and this is all the instructions that ChatGPT wrote. I didn't write this because it was all an experiment to see what does it do. I tend to experiment with ChatGPT by prompting it as little as possible, just to see how it's thinking and what it does without any interference from me, because that's the interesting part for me, rather than, sometimes I might give some more detailed ones, or sometimes I'm just like, let's see what you do if I just give you very little instructions. And so that's what it looks like. And we can also test it later, but yeah, you can ask any question you want. Let's see what it says. But it has my CV and things like that. It's very useful when, for things. And sometimes it's useful, like, how would I think about this? Or, it's basically have a conversation partner that knows how I think. So it's very interesting. Other experiments I've done, you could read all about this on artificial thought. I also accidentally stumbled across a really interesting experiment. I was watching a TV program where there was a character said, I want to gift X amount of money to various relatives. And the lawyer, the other character, was very surprised. And I was like, I don't understand. They seem like small sums. And so, after about 30 seconds of Googling it, I realized this is going to be a really difficult one to Google. So I thought, do you know what? Low stakes, if it's not accurate. Gave it to ChatGPT, and I was like, let's triangulate, try another one. And they answered it differently. And, it kind of snowballed from there. And then, before I knew it, I tested 6 of them in the same way. And all the answers are on mirror board and everything, so you can see it. But it kind of, where I got really interested in is that it was actually DeepSeek that brought up ethics. And there was, that was around the time when DeepSeek was all new, and people talked about that, like how DeepSeek has some guardrails and blah, blah. But actually, it was DeepSeek that brought up the fact that, yeah, so, plantation owner in North Carolina in 1770, probably, this wealth is based on, slavery. And it was the only one that brought up ethics. So I was like, that's interesting. And now now I want to see what everything else does. So that was an interesting experiment. And just as an idea of you have to invest time to try things out. So that's how you'll learn this kind of stuff. Other accidental discoveries, and I promise you, I'm done with the case studies. But so I also accidentally discovered this because I have used ChatGPT a lot to learn to cook and bake, because I hate instructions and recipes. They are really, I don't have the patience for it. But ChatGPT is super handy because I can just ask it for, oh, I don't have this ingredient, but can I use this? And it says, yes, you can, but you have to adjust it like this. I'm like, excellent. And, what if I add this? And it's like, you can tweak it that way, but make sure you do this. I'm like, excellent. Why does cream split? And it explains how to do it. I was like, brilliant. So, but anyway, I then asked it to basically do a catalog of my, my pantry, because I forget what I have. So I took pictures of stuff that I was, I had. I was like, let's see if this works. And then I discovered the next day or a few days later that this pantry inventory that I'd uploaded, it said, file not accessible anymore. I'm like, what do you mean it's not accessible? I just put it up there. And so I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean? What is this? I've been using this for a year and a half. Oh, I'd never heard of this before. They don't say it anywhere. So I learned that there is an environmental reset, that they just magically disappear, and a temporary code environment and all this stuff. And I just asked it a bunch of stuff, and I turned it into a little fact sheet. But and also the knowledge files and custom GPTs, they randomly disappear at some point. So, this is also something that OpenAI does not talk about. But you built all these custom GPTs, and then like you go back and like a few months later, like, wait a minute, it doesn't have any of the stuff that was supposed to make it special. So that's a bit of a problem, considering they were going to do it as a custom GPT store. That's pretty unreliable. But so there's a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't learn unless you interact with it. That's just kind of an example. Like, I've been using it extensively for a year and a half, and I had no idea this is happening. It doesn't say, it's not in any instructions anywhere. So there's that. Oh, and this is work in progress, but I also discovered that the voice, not so with Gemini apparently, but with ChatGPT, the voices are different. They have a different personality. I did not really realize that they have a very, very different personality. And I changed to another one, and I was like, wait a minute, this is a very different conversation. And then I ended up kind of like, I was like, can you tell me a bit more about that? Like, what are they all of them like? And ChatGPT knows. So I'm gonna, I need to finish this to put it out. But that's another thing that I discovered just by experimenting. And so it's not just about the tone of voice, it's how they interact with you. Some of them are, they actually have different ways of talking to you and different ways of processing things. So some of them are good for emotional stuff, if that's what you want to do, or the other ones are more for thinking through ideas, which is what I often do with the advanced voice mode. And yeah, and also if you use advanced voice mode and then switch to text, it totally switches to it remembers more about you when you use the text mode, but not the advanced voice mode. It seems to not remember as much about you. And if you record your voice and it transcribes it, it's not the same as the advanced voice mode. So these are all different, but there is no guide anywhere. And these are things that you will only discover if you work, you use these tools. So that's it. Oh, I forgot. You also asked me to note that how weird is AI? It is very weird, in fact, but no one talks about it. There's a whole bunch of stuff, training data, research and development. Everything is weird, super weird. Governance, design, all of that. But there's very little about it. I'm going to write about it, so we don't need to go into detail. I'm going to document this in an article soon. But basically, hardly anyone is writing about this or talking about it because it's just kind of, this is just how it is, and we don't know what it means. A bit like we don't know about why psychology is weird. We don't really know much of the time what impact that has. But I think it's kind of concerning that that generative AI in particular is very, very weird and very, very Silicon Valley. There are some maybe unexpected biases as well. There's they reflect Western moral frameworks, which is often not a problem. I wouldn't notice that, obviously, but other people might. It's still not a good thing. There are also some things that you might notice yourself, that there is what I've noticed recently increasingly is this homogenized expression. It is very, very difficult to get ChatGPT to not write in certain ways, so you may have seen people talk about the M dash, the long dash, that's a sign of ChatGPT. Sure. I actually like that ChatGPT does that because it's quite hard to do on a keyboard. So I often actually copy it and move it around where I want it to put. But where it puts it is very sort of like tech publication writing, also very Medium as the publication medium, very LinkedIn hype style. It prefers, here are some things that you will notice. If someone writes, it's not X, it's Y, it's called the negation reframe or antithesis structure. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Almost every person who has that's been written by ChatGPT, because no one writes like that, but everyone writes like that right now. It's not this, it's this other thing. And it's very, very difficult, borderline impossible to get ChatGPT to stop doing it. It does it in its own answers. I have put it in so many instructions that I hate it. I keep telling it I hate it. That's the one thing it doesn't remember. The other things it does is like, some people think it's X, others think it's that. And sometimes it's this third thing. It's called a rhythmic triad. So there are certain ways of expression that are very, very American and very sort of, I don't know what to call it. Just terrible. I will write about that at some point as well because it's really starting to bother me. And so that's a real problem. I don't know if it happens in if you write other languages, but it certainly happens in English, and it's awful because I feel like most people are not aware of that and don't hate it as much as I do. And sometimes I just give up after I've told like 5 times that I hate this, and then I try to fix it myself. And I was like, oh God, okay, I'll let one slide. You can't write anything. It basically writes it in something that sounds clever, but is actually quite empty. And that's what it is. And I feel like this is what a lot of our writing, what we see written, will turn into. Anyway, that was that. And that's me. And those are the Substacks that exist, and you can find me there. Prismatic Strategies website is work in progress. I'm rebranding, so I wouldn't navigate to that just yet. But you can find me on LinkedIn or those Substacks. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll stop sharing now. I have spoken for a lot longer than 20 minutes, Guillermo. You should have told me because I didn't see the clock. Thanks.
Yeah, never mind.
When I'm third, I can't see the clock.
It was great. Uh,
Can't hear.
we have a bunch of questions. We have a couple on the chat. Henry had one. I think he wants to get the ball rolling, and then we move to the
Sure.
questions in the chat. So if anyone else wants to put the comments in the chat, then we will start picking up and get you guys into the mic. So Henry.
Thank you, Lina. Very interesting. I had a question. I would like to get back to one of the initial topics you mentioned on shaping decision contexts. Because as I see, AI tools will make it easier for humans to somehow outsource the decision making. And then I'd like to get your views on, do you see it's going to be a positive thing, the idea that we have a partner to help us to take better decisions, or even it's a good thing to reflect on what will be the ideal decision for us human beings to take? Or do you feel like there is a risk or a negative point on we are outsourcing our decision making, we will not collaborate with other people because we now have this tool, and then we'll just focus on this tool? How do you see? I'd like to hear from you.
I think it is actually, the answer is as varied as people, because what generative AI gives back to you is a mirror of you. Mine is different to what I've been talking about this with my husband, who is actually a software developer and does use AI, but for coding. And so he doesn't use ChatGPT as much for this kind of stuff. So when he talks to it, it's not as personalized. Mine is very personal. It knows a lot about me. And, as much as on a rational level, that's not probably a good thing, but it's quite fun. So mine reflects how I interact with it. And yours reflects how you interact with it. Some people will inevitably use it for emotional processing. I don't so much. I use it for intellectual processing, or let's call it that, more like ideas and concepts and things like that, or something very practical. Now it entirely depends on the person. Who you are, you will reflect. That gets reflected in your use, and whatever comes back. If you don't make very good decisions in the first place, it's probably not going to help you make better decisions, because it depends on the questions you ask. It depends on what you bring to the equation. So it's probably going to. My guess is that it amplifies whatever you bring to it. You know, and I don't think there's one answer. It's if you are prone to conspiracy theories, and if you are prone to, there are some people, I've seen this on TikTok, which was like, excuse me, this is why I find TikTok fascinating as a sort of a informal ethnography. There are some people who think that you can do some things and then you'll awaken the AI. And I was like, it's a what? You do what? And it was just like, it didn't occur to me because I wouldn't do that. So I think there are as many ways to do that as there are people, unfortunately.
So I guess on the same token, I'll read a question from the chat, or if Rodrigo wants to pick up the mic. But he mentions that recently a report was released highlighting the primary uses of generative AI in 2025 and comparing these with 2024. And then there was the report observes a shift from use cases that in 2024 were like idea generation, and in 2025 it goes more towards therapy and companionship, things that you are saying. So what do you think about this trend? And then I would add, what do you think about the risks about this trend? Because having a therapy with somebody that or some entity an algorithm at the end of the day that doesn't have the guardrails of a therapist.
Yeah. So I have seen that report as well, and I think part of it could be that it wasn't like, if I Well, first of all, the LLMs are very different. So ChatGPT is not the only one. Mistral is not, for example, the French one. You would not use it for therapy or companionship. Mistral is very to the point. Gemini is also not very interested in any kind of stuff like that. Claude, bless her, ChatGPT is probably the most like that. Now the shift is probably my guess is more people are experimenting with ChatGPT than they were before, and that brings people into the use space who might be using it more for therapy and companionship. Like it would have been more of the early adopters maybe before, and then idea generation would have been one of those things that you use it professionally. So that's my guess where that's partly coming from. The other thing is that ChatGPT has evolved enormously in a year and a half, a lot. The memory changes the experience completely. When you have to explain things over and over again, and it forgets. When the token window was much smaller, by the way, you can always ask in a conversation, how's the token window? And it'll tell you how close you are to it being full, and you have to move to another conversation. You can just ask, how's the token window? And it will tell you how much space it has for that conversation to remember at that point. Also, another thing that I just picked up from TikTok or somewhere. So the opportunities for those uses, I think, have expanded and made it possible. So I think that's part of it. Is it a good idea? Um, Good question. I think again that depends on the person. That is partly, I think, a question of how sensible the people who design these systems are. Is it good? I have to say that I have gained well, I mean I knew quite a lot of the stuff because I've done a lot of self-reflection, but I would have to say that when I've asked ChatGPT I've tested things like roast me in the most the funniest way you can think of, or what's the most embarrassing thing you know about me, all things that I've seen somewhere, and I'm going to test this. And the things it says, like, wow, I don't think I ever talked about that, so you can't know it from that perspective. It's just not something I've talked to ChatGPT about, but it has been very insightful in how it feeds back to me, better than a therapist, better than any therapist I've ever met, or any book or anything else. It's like, wow, okay, yeah, that is actually accurate. I would not have necessarily put it in those words because I have never thought of it that way. But now that you say it, that is actually true. And before you think it's like aspirational, it's not. There are things that I would not screenshot and put on LinkedIn because they're not like positive things that I'd like to believe about myself. They're more like, yes, this is what you ideally want for a friend. I was like, that's not very flattering to me, is it? Whoops. Or other things like it's not like, oh, you're a wonderful person. It's not like that. It's much more precise and yeah. So I think it can be. Also, it is things like therapy is very expensive. It's not available for everyone. So I think it's a little bit elitist of us to think like, well, is it good that people do therapy with ChatGPT? Not everyone can afford, $100, $200, whatever, euro, whatever it is, wherever you are, what kind of, counselor, therapist you speak to, and they're only available at a certain time of the day. So if it helps, if it helps people talk through things sometimes, then great. But there's always a risk in everything. The guardrail should be there, but I mean, I'm not really. I don't know if I'm the best person to. I don't think I've tested the edge cases of that.
Brilliant. So Juliana Rufino asks, how can we leverage behavioral science and AI to design fairer, more inclusive decision-making process? Ones that overcome weird bias or weirdness and connect change makers across different contexts.
I mean, there's only so much we can do about the weirdness of the data sets. It's like we are downstream. We're not the decision makers. It's like that's long gone. We can be aware of them. We can try to, we can try to work with them, but we can't influence that because we're not the ones designing the tools, unless you find a way to work there. but we don't have that power. So I think that's a problem. But I think we can be aware of them. We can educate other people about them. But we have to also, you can't just say that there's a weird bias. You have to experience it. You have to, you have to have firsthand experience. So like what I was saying about the writing stuff, that really bothers me because I'm not a native English speaker, and it bothers me that there is one way of thinking that is becoming somehow, you know, it bothers me that we are flattening um, writing and thought into a particular format that the LLM find. It actually explained it to me that the LLMs find it satisfying to write in that way, and that was quite fascinating. It's like it can explain to you things like, well, why do you write this way? It's like, oh, fascinating question, and it explains like, oh right, so it finds it pleasant to write that way. I don't, but this leads to us thinking in, pop sci quotes, because that's what all the articles turn into if you let ChatGPT write them. Honestly, it's really bad. And I feel like this is I don't know if this is what model collapse looks like when basically when the LLMs are trained on more and more stuff that's LLM generated. I feel like this change has happened in the past couple of months. It's impossible to get rid of it, and I feel like that's because they've been training it with stuff that ChatGPT wrote, like LLM slop from a year ago. I don't know, but I feel it's been happening so much. So I don't know, but that wasn't a good answer. But I don't actually have a good answer to that. I don't know. I'm trying to work out how we can do something about that.
Just a quick note. Marcela wants Elena's bot to discuss her challenges. So maybe there's a way to monetize it.
Well, yeah, I don't think my bot will be that useful for that. Also, this is the problem is like OpenAI wanted people to monetize them. I think they've quietly forgotten about that because imagine, people built these GPTs and the files just disappear. That's terrible. It's not a proper product. It's like we're all beta testing all of this all the time. It's not a proper product, a stable one. But yeah.
It's true. Juliana, you have your hands up?
Yeah, one question, Elena, in regards to debiasing, have you used the AI for debiasing when you write? And the reason I'm asking is just because you're such a heavy user and you understand it. So I'm thinking about policymakers. If in a way we could, motivate them to debias themselves, which is a big challenge for us in development. When writing papers, when deciding and influencing on policy making, we come from, the majority of us, from weird countries, and we bring the baggage with us. It's very hard for us to debias ourselves, and using tools like these could be a way. So I wonder if you have tried when you write to, measure your own biases, or if you use the AI to guide you in this process.
So the way I use it, not specifically, I don't specifically ask those types of things. I think I probably do it manually myself when it's writing something. I'm like, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. But you could, I'm not quite sure exactly what your use case might be, but I know that other people have used this type of thing, like look at it from a sociologist perspective, look at it from the perspective of someone who's from somewhere else, and like different professions. So that's one way to try and like get different angles to what you're doing. But I think I'm not sure what kind of debiasing you're talking about, like exactly.
Well,
Like
I can think of, perceptions. For instance, I'm at the World Bank, so the actual researchers, write about their perceptions on poverty. There is a known experiment that they would say that people won't have the life ambitions, and at the end of the day, that wasn't it. They just had the perception that people wouldn't dream big enough.
Right.
And they drew, and helped support policymakers in making policies to, motivate self-efficacy, greater ambitions, thinking that the baseline was much lower than it was. So they were biased in making advice and advising people that would, make the policies to change this.
Yeah. And do you want the support for you to persuade them that they're wrong? Don't go.
It would be, like a checkpoint for people to see we have unconscious biases, all of us. So when you're actually creating something, would that be efficient for you to double check?
You could.
Yeah,
you could. I mean, there's different ways to do that. One is like, do you want to persuade them when you're discussing them? When you get something from them and you want to formulate, points to counter it. Of course, you can absolutely use ChatGPT for that. You can, that's why I have like the custom GPTs. Like you can think about what kinds of materials are in your head. That's usually what I have. And I never said this, and I don't encourage illegal activities, but Anna's archive is may or may not be a place where you can find many of this kind of material. May or may not be a frequent customer there, but so that's how you can build a custom GPT that has the kinds of what's in your head. Like most of the stuff that I get is stuff that I already have, but not in a digital format. And then you ask it to critique it from that perspective based on those, and it makes your work faster. You already know, but it's hard to get out of your brain. So build a second brain. You can give them if you wanted to, you could build a custom GPT or some other kind of custom made tool, but that's a lot harder because you have to then test it and you have to experiment with it, make sure that it's okay for someone who doesn't know. The best way to use this stuff is that you kind of have a gut feeling of what's right and what where you're going with that, depending on what it is. But it's kind of it's a lot harder to build something for other people because you don't know how they're going to ask the question, and that matters a whole lot. They can like, do you think my document is perfect? And like, yes, it's great. And like, no, that's not the question you need to ask. So you can't use it to help someone else and bias themselves if they don't want to be unbiased.
And
But
do you see this happening in the future? I mean, I hear you totally, and it makes total sense. It will be useful for us, but do you think it will expand to a level that we would be able to use it for other people?
Well, if you want to use it for other people, you have to build a whole lot more. You have to build a lot more to make it more reliable. And also the other thing is you can't force people to use it. That's the problem. You can't force them to use it, and then you can't make them ask the right question that will get the answer that you want, but they don't actually want. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to see if you think of a solution to that, but that's an interesting question, and the answer isn't necessarily straightforward. You may have to experiment with this stuff to come up with an answer, or interact with ChatGPT for a while and then ask it for ideas, and probably not great the first time, try a second time, and over time you might find a solution, I think. So
great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Cool. Marcelo had a very interesting, provocative question, actually linking another hot, a hot topic on behavioral science, which is the whole data faking, data manipulation and stuff. He mentions he sees in the interaction between behavioral science and AI opportunities to better control, better audit, and better validate data, but also to improve manipulation. So, if you ever had any thoughts about it, like let's say if we build like a Francisca Gino bot to churn out fake papers. No, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. I probably will. I'm probably okay. I'm too poor for being sued. But let's imagine something like that.
Yeah, I think she's done suing people for now, I think.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you probably could, but I think an LLM is not enough for that. Is not enough. I don't think I don't think it's necessarily reliable enough to be able to do that. Like it, you can probably um, you can probably do it if you know how to ask the right questions, but I think the problem is that the kind of detective work that Data Colada does, you have to have a meta level of understanding of the stuff. You have to kind of keep looking and then go, no, that doesn't look right. But you can't ask ChatGPT, say, hey, here's a paper. Does any of this not look right? It'll either find, problems with everything or nothing, or it's just, I don't know enough about, that kind of level of statistics that the data colada guys know. So that's just my guess that I think it would be quite difficult, but I'm sure it's possible because
Yeah.
a lot of things are, I mean, I have to acknowledge the limits of my knowledge. My husband enjoys using AI to build solar system simulation. He's been doing that for fun, and he keeps showing me how amazing it is. It looks amazing, but I don't understand any of it. It's like, look, it's planetary physics. I'm like, okay, all right then. So if it can do planetary physics and simulate the entire, whatever solar system, then I'm sure it can check Francisca Gino's papers, but I just don't know how. It requires you have to have the domain knowledge to do that. But sure, I think it would be, but I don't know how to do that.
Brilliant. So Flavia, to shoot the last one because it's already tomorrow for Elena.
Oh,
And
it's okay. I'm the one who spoke too long, so without not seeing the clock, don't worry.
nah, never.
Oh, amazing, Elina. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It was very, very good. Following on Guilherme's questions, Marcelo's questions, how do you see AI to fight misinformation, fake news? Yes, because sometimes when I use ChatGPT, some information that we receive, it's not truth. And how AI could fight and help us fight misinformation, fake news in this society. I think it's a huge problem in the society right now, not only weird countries, but also in Latin American countries.
I think that's a difficult question because I'm sure AI in general could be used, but a lot depends on, these generative AI companies and their willingness to do that. If I think my faith in the big tech companies has faded dramatically after reading that book on Facebook stuff, and I feel like there is it's quite a shocking read, even if half of it, three-quarters of it is true. It's the worst part is that you can believe it, like you believe all of it because that's how little faith we have these people anymore. And I don't think they necessarily have our best interest at heart. So if they want to fight misinformation, they can probably do that. If they don't, then a bit like Facebook didn't stop caring about what's right and what's wrong and what's good for society. So I think they loosened up their guardrails on image creation a little while ago and just threw them in the wind. I haven't tried it recently, but it did a bunch of weird stuff that it shouldn't really do. And so they can do that at a drop of a hat. They could do anything they want, and this is a real problem that we are giving. Says the person who talks to ChatGPT like every day. But I'm aware of this. I wish the other ones had memory. But we're really at the mercy of a few companies. But I would test other ones, not just have one. But yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question. I think we ordinary people are quite powerless with that. We're not there to make decisions. They do whatever they want, and we just have to live with it.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you very much, Alina. So it's a huge problem that we'll face now, and we are facing now, and we'll face in the
Yeah,
future.
absolutely. I would say, to my surprise, you know, I don't use Grok because I don't like Elon Musk, but as an experiment, I have an account. I have an account because I wanted to test something. It is not complimentary to Elon Musk. It thinks Elon Musk is an idiot. So, you know, I don't know about what it says about misinformation, but his own LLM thinks he's an idiot and kind of and is not positive at all. So, you know, there's that. So it's worth, this is what I mean, that it's worth experimenting with them and asking random questions like that, like test them, see what they say, and then you'll notice um, you know, what answers you get. But also I would not use it as a search engine to actually trust it. Like I validate things, or if it's low stakes, then fine, but you know, I'll trust it to give me cooking advice. That's pretty good. So far, it hasn't gone wrong, but everything else, something that's very important, I will check that. That
Yeah,
is a digital literacy question, more broadly. Anyway,
yeah,
I put the link in, and you know, if you have any questions or anything that I don't know what I can help with, but if I can, then I can try and point you to, you know, the right person or try to help. So it was a pleasure. Hope it
that's
was
great.
helpful.
Guilherme?
Elena, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Usually, a tradition is that Flavia takes a picture, which is actually a print screen of the crowd. So,
E aí, pessoal,
Flavia,
pode
please.
as câmeras, quem puder abrir as câmeras para aparecer na foto. So we can take a picture. Renata, Rafael, Ana, good to see all of you. Anyone else? Beto, so 1, 2, 3. One
Very
more
good.
guarantee. 1, 2, 3.
Very
Great.
good.
Thank you so much, Lina. It was amazing. And all the work you did with the framework and made us think a lot about it. So it was much
You're
more fun. Thanks a
you're
lot.
welcome. It was a good spark for thinking about it and writing it down because I hadn't really written it out like that. So I'll write about it and I'll share it with you. So it'll be a little bit better than just the slides, but you know, all that stuff will come out in artificial thought eventually soon. So
Great.
Brilliant.
Congrats on the artificial thought. I heard all of them and the episodes are so nice. And
yes,
all,
all done with AI, generative AI, all of
yeah,
it,
I
absolutely
Notebook
everything.
LM?
ask
Yeah,
you about it.
Notebook LM, yeah, Notebook LM and ChatGPT basically. So yeah, and Midjourney for images. So everything is generative AI as fits the theme. So
Cool.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
amazing. And your thoughts, yes, and also your twin, yeah, the Lina thoughts. So it was
yeah, yeah. It's yeah, and if you use ChatGPT, also try the projects and stuff like that. There's loads to try. So
Mhm.
great. Anyway, yeah, very thank you very much for inviting me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
Good
Lina.
you.
night.
Obrigada,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
pessoal.
Bye
Boa
bye.
noite. Have a
Obrigado,
great
gente.
night.
Até o mês que vem.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Tchau, tchau, pessoal. Obrigado.
Pode parar a gravação.